What, you think we were gonna stop with these tier lists? Huh? The hits keep coming in this channel. The hits keep coming. And today we are going to be tackling one of my favorite bands, Radiohead. All their albums ranked best to worst in a tier list. And listen, I'm not even gonna put an F tier, because all these albums are fire in their own way. Speaking in my opinion. But before we get into it, if you enjoy the content in this channel, you like these type of videos, these tier list videos, and other videos that I do on this channel, hit the like button down below, hit the subscribe button down below, okay? Alright, now, we're going to start with Pablo Honey, which came out, I think, 92, 93, I believe. So it's their first album. Pablo Honey is an anomaly in their discography because it probably sounds like, I mean, this is going to sound like the most hipster thing I've ever said on this channel, but it's the most normie album in their discography. Even though other albums have sold more, even though other albums have had more critical acclaim, you gotta look at the context of that era where grunge was very popular, especially in America, but crossing over to the UK. And, you know, the Britpop thing hadn't really happened yet. Oasis, Blur, you know, they were kind of around the corner. So really, grunge was taking over the world. And a lot of bands try to sound like Nirvana. A lot of bands try to sound like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. Pablo Honey, what you're going to get is pretty much what you got from most rock albums from that time. You know, that grunge aesthetic, loud guitars, shredding vocals, all that stuff. So when you listen to a song like Creep, when it kind of has that like loud, quiet, loud dynamic, you know, it doesn't sound like anything they did in their later albums, not even close. But this became a surprise hit in America because this was what a lot of bands were doing in that era. So a lot of people gravitated to it. And in some respects, Creep is still their most popular song to many people. If you're not even in the Radiohead, Creep has took on a new life. I mean, listen, it was in the Social Network trailer. So Creep, for a lot of people, you know, that's what they know Radiohead by. For me, I think it's an okay song. I don't think it's even my favorite song on this album. Now, I think Pablo Honey does kind of get a bad rap just for being, oh, that's the album that has Creep. But there's other great songs here. Anyone can play guitar. It's a great song, I think. I think it's a great song. Ripcord, Vegetable. See, I'm just going to be naming out songs that come to the head. You know, there are some deep cuts here that are pretty good that I like more than Creep. But if we're talking in comparison to that discography, I don't really go back to this album a lot, and I still think this is Radiohead still kind of figuring things out, because they would sound completely different in a couple years later on the next album, the Benz. But yeah, this is an album. This is a sound of a band that's trying to figure things out, figure what things work, what things don't work. It's not as experimental, but it's not as like poppy, you know. So as many other bands out there, you got the sense that, okay, this is a band that has something here, but we don't know what it is yet. So I think it's a decent album. I think it gets a bad rap sometimes. I'm gonna put it in the C tier. Next album, The Benz, one of my favorite Radiohead albums, and I think it damn near sounds like a completely new artist, in my opinion. I mean, the growth that they shown from Pablo Honey to this is incredible. Really, the Benz at that time in 95 pushed Radiohead not to the mainstream per se, but it caught a lot of people's attention. Critics loved it, public loved it, had a couple of decent hits like High and Dry, but Radiohead established himself as the premier British indie rock band. And while at the time in the UK, Oasis was still big, Blur was still big, but Radiohead was kind of like what, you know, the cool alternative kids liked. You know, R.E.M. and U2 gave them praise. So if bands like that are giving Radiohead praise, that should tell you something. It gave them like great street cred. Back to front, just an incredible album. No filler here, man. I mean, so many great songs here. The title track, Street Spirit, which is one of Radiohead's most depressing songs, And for Radiohead, discography, to say that's one of their bleakest songs, that should tell you something, right? Bones, High and Dry, Fake Plastic Trees. I mean, every song here is just great in its own way. I even love Sulk, the way that Tom York reaches into that falsetto, that higher register, in that last 30 seconds. Album gives me goosebumps, man. It's an incredible album. I'm going to put this in the S tier. I think at the time, the Benz was definitely a pivot point in their careers. And once they found out that people like this type of Radiohead, they're like, okay, we can be experimental. We can even go more out of the box. And people are going to like it. And this sets the stage for what a lot of people consider their magnum opus, OK Computer, which is even more just far out album than the Benz, pushing them to limits, making a concept album. And really, Radiohead, with this album, playing with song structures, playing with different sounds, even bringing in sound effects using like a computer voice. So, OK Computer, a lot of people consider this the first 2000s album, because if you really look at what indie rock became in the 2000s, it was very dreary, very moody. Bands like Coldplay, bands like Muse would not have existed without this album. And even the Benz, if we're gonna stretch it out. But OK Computer, what can I say about this album that hasn't already been said? Just one of the best rock albums of the 90s. Maybe some consider it one of the best rock albums ever. I'm not going to go that far yet. Maybe time will tell. And I know maybe you think it's been 25 years. What do you mean time will tell? But I think OK Computer certainly is one of the most influential, one of the most impactful albums. Forget rock albums, just albums. Even artists in R&B and hip hop are like, oh, I'm gonna make this my OK Computer. I mean, it's just a phenomenal album. Just nothing more needs to be said. Gonna put it in the S tier. Kid A. Now, I have a hot take here. Okay, it's very controversial. I think Kid A, it's a good album. I would say borders on being great, but I think it is slightly overrated. Okay? I don't gravitate toward this album like I do towards the Benz, OK Computer, other Radiohead albums. I think Kid A, for what it did for music, I'll give it its props. It had a huge influence on what it did in music. Some may say it changed electronic music forever. Some may say it changed rock music forever. I'll give it that. If we're talking about the album itself, yeah, there are some great songs here. Idiotech is one of my favorite Radiohead songs ever. I like the national anthem. I like Everything in Its Right Place. But there are some songs in this album that are like, they don't really hit for me. Tree Fingers don't really hit for me. Motion Picture Soundtrack, okay. Morning Bell, it's alright. But the songs that are great here are phenomenal, okay? And by the way, I did a video with Kira What's a Diver, top 10 Radiohead songs. Check that on her channel, and check that channel out. It's a great channel. Check that out. But we did a collab on counting our 10 favorite Radiohead singles, Radiohead songs ever. I kind of leaned less of Kid A because I just think that Idiotech obviously is a banger. It's one of the most popular songs, but there's some songs here that don't really hit for me. So I have to be honest. I think Kid A is, like I said, classic album. But for me, even though it's still a classic, I go to other Radiohead albums more, So I'm going to put it in the A tier because of its impact. I'll be nice. But I'm not going to put it in the S tier. Not going to do that. Amnesiac, I think, is one of their more underrated albums. And I think here, Kid A was kind of like the template, right? They were like, we're going to reinvent ourselves. It sold very well. And it was a number one album. Hard to believe that Kid A was a number one album. But I think it caught a lot of people off guard. And really, Kid A set the stage for what Radiohead would do for the rest of their career, which is we're going to do some ambient songs. We're going to do some songs that are influenced by electronic music. But we're also going to do some traditional rock songs. And I think with Amnesiac, they focused on making actual songs here. Whereas Kid A reminds me a little bit about David Bowie's Low. Half the album is like actual songs. Half of the songs are... Half of the album is... the other half of the album... Getting tongue-tied here. The other half of the album is just kind of like ambient type tracks. With Amnesiac, there are some actual songs here, more or less. The way this thing kicks off with that opener, just incredible. One of my favorite Radiohead songs. Probably my favorite Radiohead opener, if I'm being honest. Aside from Airbag and Planet Telex. Man, what that's like trippy, man. That song is trippy. But other songs like Dollars and Cents, even Life in a Glass House, the closer. Just like, man, it's just a lot of great songs and more influenced by jazz music in a sense. They said they were very influenced by, Charlie Parker and Ornette Coleman, who kind of did experimental jazz in the 60s and 70s. So Radiohead changing up a little bit, but not too much. I think this album doesn't get enough praise, and I think it's a very solid album. So I'm gonna put this in the A tier. Wonderful album. Next one, Hail to the Thief. Okay. Now this came out in 2003, and some may have said that this alluded to George Bush. And it's definitely, the album's a lot more melancholic, a lot more socio-political in a sense. But with all that being said, another solid album from Radiohead. Just an era when they can do no wrong. I mentioned in the collaboration that I did with Kieran Was a Diver that There is my favorite Radiohead song of all time. One of my favorite songs, period. But that song is just on another level for me. If that song was the entire album, I would still put it in the A. But there's some other great songs here. Mixomatosis has kind of like a nice groove to it. It's a nice electronic groove that will be very influential on dubstep in the next decade, 2010s. And then, you have songs like Wolf at the Door. Now, not all the songs here hit for me. There's not any bad songs, but there's some songs that I lean more towards the others. So, I think it's a solid project, but not near the tier of Kid A and Amnesiac. And also, I think it's one of their longer projects. So, it's an album where some of the parts are better than the whole. But I still think it's a pretty good album. I'm going to put it in the B tier. In Rainbows, their next album didn't come out until another 4 years. And really, I think this is when Radiohead is, first of all, it's my personal favorite Radiohead album, and I think this is where Radiohead really hit the mark here. It's like, alright, like Kid A, we were experimenting, and it's a great experiment. One of the best rock experiments of all time. But in Radiohead, it's like, alright, this is who we are. We are comfortable in this lane, and we're going to excel at it. And really, in Rainbows, 10 songs, all killer, no filler. Just one of the most immaculate rock albums of the decade. And really, Radiohead at their most romantic. A lot of these songs here, songs like Nude and songs like House of Cards, Tom York's vocals are just like really seductive in these songs, and it really has a way of like pulling you in. Songs like Jigsaw falling into place, songs like Videotape, the way that it just, I don't even know the instrument that they used on this, but like just it literally sounds like a tape recorder just reeling back. And then you have your up-tempo songs here like 15 Step, Body Snatchers, just great like rocking songs. Well, in 15 Step, it's more not even like a rock song, but it has that kind of like groove, even like hip hop influenced beat to it, which I love. But yeah, In Rainbows also changed the business too. Really changed the model of like, pay for what you want, which completely changed the music business. In Rainbows, a perfect album to me, putting it in the S tier. The next one, King of Limbs, after another 4-year hiatus. Now, when this album came out, I really did love this album. It was a little different, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of Kid A. There were some songs here that were, rock songs, but then there were songs that were kind of more towards the ambient vein, and it has a wonderful opening called Bloom. Really sucks you in this album. Morning Mr. Magpie and Giving Up the Ghost is a great song. I even love that song Separator. It's a very Beatles-esque type song. But as the years went on, I kind of was less favorable towards this album. I still like it, but I just don't go back to it as much. It didn't really have a lot of meat on the bone. Songs like Codex is kind of like, that really needs to be on this album. Like, I understand what they're trying to go for, but it's kind of like a skip to me. But songs like Lotus Flower, another song that's just amazing. One of my other favorite Radiohead songs coming off this album. But yeah, it's just an album that I just don't really go back to that much. Like I said, I think it's a decent album, but I'm nowhere near what their albums were. So I'm gonna put this in the C tier. One of their more weaker efforts, but if I'm saying that about Radiohead, that should tell you how great the discography is. And then last but not least, A Moon-Shaped Pool, which is one of my least favorite Radiohead albums, in my opinion. I know people that love this album. Kara, when I did this video with her, she loved this album. And I think it's because you have to be in a certain mood in this album. It's definitely a breakup album. You have to be going through some feels. It's one of those where you just went through maybe like a breakup or a traumatic event. You just listen for coping. But, I'm not, if I want to go to Radiohead, this is not the album that I rush to. It's a very, contemplative, very melancholic album. And like I said, if we're saying about Radiohead, that should tell you something. But it's definitely more cohesive in that vein. There's not a lot of like up-tempo songs. Burn the Witch is probably the most up-tempo song, which when I heard Burn the Witch, I was like, alright, this is a great single. Like, the rest of the album is going to be just like this, and it's not. It's kind of more in the vein of like songs like Daydreaming, which has grown to be one of my favorite Radiohead songs. But the rest of this album, maybe as of now, it just doesn't speak to me. And I think Tom York's lyrics here, if you read the lyrics, they're incredible. I don't know, sonically, it doesn't really hit for me that much. It's one of those Radiohead albums that is just like, a lot of songs here I can do without, But we'll see. Maybe in a few years I will completely reverse this decision. But as of now, I'm going to put this in the C tier. And yeah, that's it. That is my Radiohead tier list. Tell me what you think in the comment section. What are some of your favorite and least favorite Radiohead albums? What do you think of this tier list? YouTube recommends these 2 other videos to check out after this one. Thank you guys for watching this one. Love you guys. Till next time. Peace.